We now move to a highly anticipated part of our program, the Jill Blewett Memorial Lecture. The Jill Blewett Memorial Lecture, known as the JBML, was instituted by AUSIT in 1992. The purpose of the lecture is to honour the memory of Jill Blewett, who played an important role in the development of the TNI profession in Australia before her untimely death at the age of 50 in 1988. Delivering this year's lecture is Mond, Assistant Secretary for Migrant English and Language Services at the Australian Government's Department of Home Affairs. Ali is a key figure in the development of language policies in Australia, and we are thrilled to have her here today. Please join me in welcoming Ali Mond.
Thank you, Fatih. Can everyone hear me okay? Thank you. Well, what an absolute honour it is to be invited here today to pay tribute to Jill Blewett. And I have to say, as I look around the room and see a room full of highly skilled professionals and practitioners in the sector, I feel truly humbled to be here and be invited to provide this lecture. Thank you so much, Erica, and the AUSIT National Council. I also would like to acknowledge the Wurundjeri, Woiwurrung and Bunurong Bun Wurrung peoples of the Eastern Kulin as traditional custodians of the land we are meeting on today, and pay my respects to their elders past and present. As we begin the 37th National and AUSIT Conference, it would be remiss of me not to reflect on the rich linguistic and cultural diversity of our First Nations people. With more than 250 Indigenous languages and around 800 dialects, Australia is one of the most linguistically and culturally diverse places in the world. Several years ago, Miss Amelia Turner, speaking on behalf of the Lura Tupa Aboriginal Corporation, beautifully expressed how Indigenous languages are intrinsically linked to culture, identity, community, and belonging. She said, "Our language is sacred. Words are given to us by the land, and those words are sacred. Words make things happen, make us alive. Words come not only from us, but also from our ancestors. Language is what we see in people. Being you is to know your language. It is rooted in your relationship with creation, in your kinship that cycles from then and there onwards and onwards." I have the utmost respect for individuals and agencies who are part of initiatives that are maintaining, revitalising and supporting Indigenous languages across Australia, and I acknowledge and pay my respects to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who are here with us today. I have reflected a lot on how to best pay tribute to Jill and the legacy that she left as a staunch advocate for language services. It's been my experience that this sector is one of passion and strong commitment. People who come into this sector do so through a desire to connect, understand, and support each other. That passion and commitment has been clear in the interactions I've had with many of you, and it's clear when we reflect on the work of Jill Blewett. Jill was a pioneer in the language services sector and had an unwavering commitment to improving access and equity for all, particularly multicultural communities, through her various roles. Jill was a translator and interpreter, a senior lecturer, and heavily involved with NAATI through the South Australian State Accreditation Panel for Translators, serving 2 terms on the NAATI board as a member of the NAATI Steering Committee and as chair of NAATI's Qualifications Assessment and Advisory Committee. Adelaide was at the forefront of progressive social policy in Australia in the 1960s and 1970s. Jill was very much involved in a number of fronts, and I think this work is particularly worth reflecting on in the light of recent international events. Aside from her work in the language services sector, she lobbied for the reform of laws governing women's reproductive rights and was also a patron of the arts. Jill played a pivotal role in the formative years of the translating and interpreting profession in Australia, fighting for high standards and better regulation of the profession. Her efforts set the groundwork for some of the structures that continue to see Australia as a world leader in the community-based translating and interpreting. We have a... Have I just managed... Oh no, thought I managed to click it off, sorry. We have a collective responsibility to continue to follow Jill's example in fighting for best practice, high standards, and ensuring Australia continues to be a world leader in this space. And I hope that's something we can all take time to reflect on over the next few days. The theme of this year's conference is Linguistic Equity and Access, Translating and Interpreting, Connecting Our Communities and the World. And in today's world, that is more important than ever. Community need for language services is growing. As both Erica and Assistant Minister Hill touched on, the 2021 census data shows that almost 700,000 people over the age of 5 have limited English proficiency. This number has been steadily growing and will continue to grow. Building on over 65,000 years of First Nations history and culture, we are so fortunate to have such rich linguistic diversity with over 300 languages spoken in Australia today. Australia has a long and proud history of providing language tuition and language services to new migrants. We have two of the longest running Australian government programs in the Adult Migrant English Program and TIS National, both established soon after World War II and both the first of their kind in the world. I'm privileged to have responsibility for oversight of both of these programs within the Department of Home Affairs, and will speak in a bit more detail about these today. As Assistant Minister Hill mentioned, Australia was the first country and remains the only country to have a national accreditation authority for translators and interpreters, and AUSIT was the first national association to publish a code of ethics for the translating and interpreting profession. I touched already on the important roles that Jill played within NAATI and in the education and training sector, and it is with thanks to pioneers and forward thinkers like Jill that these programs were well established and continue to flourish today. They are such a crucial underpinning to the success of our multicultural country. But as you all know, our language services sector is facing challenges, including major sustainability issues. This has been a focus of the department over the last few years, and I'll outline some of the work we're doing in this space today. But before I get to that, I thought I would share with you some of my own experiences with and passion for languages. Like many Australians, both my parents migrated to Australia. My mum came from England as a 10-pound pom, and my dad came from Slovakia on a working holiday visa. He was working in the desert as a geologist, and Mum was hitchhiking around the country, and they met in a pub in Alice Springs. For as long as I can remember, I've loved to learn languages, and from an early age begged my father to teach me Slovak. Unfortunately, he had no interest. Like many migrants at the time, he changed his surname on arrival to Australia from Medvetsky to Mond, and did not maintain strong connections with his home country. And in fact, it wasn't until I was much older that I realised what an impact this had on my own identity in Australia. So it was the 1980s, and with no iPad in sight or language lessons on offer, I took matters into my own hands and taught myself to speak backwards. This started with reading street signs on the car trip to school. I started reading them backwards, then progressed to sentences, and by the time I was in the last year of primary school, I would get on the school bus, hear the song playing on the radio, and spend the rest of the bus trip working out how to sing it backwards. I also developed all sorts of linguistic rules around how to manage consonant digraphs and ensure the syllable count remained the same. Like I said, there were no iPads back then, and yes, I was a huge nerd, and as my team has politely pointed out to me, I'm still a huge nerd, so shout out to all the other huge nerds that are in the room today. By the time I got to high school, thankfully language lessons were on offer, and I chose Japanese, which I did throughout high school and college. Of course, what this meant in our education system is that I had around 2 hours of Japanese lessons each week. At the end of college, I had no idea what I wanted to do next, but given I'd spent so much time learning Japanese, but still really only had a basic knowledge, I decided to go and spend some time working in Japan. I lived in a beautiful town on one of the lakes of Mount Fuji, Lake Kawaguchiko, working in a hotel that catered for Japanese tourists. So it was a completely Japanese-speaking environment and full immersion. I carried with me everywhere a small telephone book that I used to create a personal dictionary every time I learned a new word, and I'm sure it's a technique that many of you have used. And this is where I learnt that the more time you spend studying a language, the more you realise how much you don't know. As a tourist, you tend to feel quite confident throwing out the few phrases you know, but as you become more proficient, you gain awareness of the intricacies, a little more self-conscious, and also experience frustrating plateaus. By the end of my year in Japan, I remember reflecting that I had improved quite a lot, but not as much as I would have hoped. But then as I was cleaning out my work locker, I found a menu card from my early days on which I had written in hiragana and katakana across the top very basic phrases like, "Hello, my name is Ali. I'll be your waitress today. The specials on the menu today are..." Phrases that now seemed so basic to me, and I realised how far I had in fact come. I had enrolled to do a Bachelor of Asian Studies, majoring in Japanese at the ANU, but I still had 6 months before that commenced. I had always wanted to learn Spanish, so I decided to travel to Spain for 4 months with a friend with the intention of finding work and immersing myself in the language and culture. However, about a month in, we met another Australian girl who was travelling to Morocco. Not really knowing anything about Morocco, we decided to join her for a week before going to do a farm stay back in Spain. But after a week, we fell in love with the magic of Morocco and spent the next few months travelling there, where I eventually met my husband. And just like that sliding doors moment in Alice Springs, I changed my degree to a Bachelor of Arts, majoring in linguistics and Arabic with a minor in Spanish. What that meant for my degree is that I spent 4 hours a week in Arabic lessons. I studied for 1 year before deferring to spend 6 months in Morocco with my husband and his family, and that is again where I experienced full immersion and developed fluency in the language. Without that, I'm not sure I would have come out of that degree with more than a basic proficiency. Even at the time, I was reluctant to tell people that I was majoring in Arabic, as in most other countries, to major in a language would mean doing half of the curriculum in that language, not 4 hours a week. I have immense respect for the work that a lot of you do translating and interpreting and connecting our communities. I appreciate the immense effort, discipline, and dedication this takes. I'm sorry to say that despite my love for languages and having reached reasonably high proficiency in the 3 I have studied, I have failed dismally in maintaining them. These days, I still speak Moroccan Arabic at home and immerse myself every time we visit Morocco. But my standard Arabic is rusty and I've not maintained Japanese or Spanish. I like to think that it's still in there to tap into, but as you all know, if you don't use it, you lose it. Having said that, I have bizarrely maintained my ability to speak backwards and can do this not only in English, but also the other languages I've studied. Some information is just stored in there with the 1980s song lyrics. I now have 3 children, and I'm really pleased that they have the opportunity to experience a bilingual education that has provided them with full immersion in French since preschool. It's completely different to how I learnt languages as a child, and it's a model I'd like to see more of in Australia. My oldest son is due to start college next year, and I'm happy to tell you that he's looking forward to continue with both French and Spanish at college. He had also hoped to study translating and interpreting, but I'm sorry to say that the course has been discontinued next year due to a lack of demand for the subject, which, as you all know, is a reflection on the state of the sector that it is getting more and more difficult to attract young people, and it's something I'll talk more about today. My children also have varying degrees of fluency in Moroccan Arabic. Through my linguistics major at ANU, I studied both second language acquisition and child language acquisition, so I knew all the theory of how to best raise bilingual children. But again, I'm sorry to say that neither my husband nor I have the discipline to stick to routines, and we really speak our own odd mixture of Moroccan English in our house. As I said, this experience with different languages gives me a huge appreciation and respect for the highly skilled work that translators and interpreters do. It has also given me first-hand experience of the importance of language for connecting and having a true and deep understanding of other people, their culture, and different worldviews. For someone who never knew what I wanted to do but kept following what I loved, I have to pinch myself sometimes at how fortunate I am to be heading up a branch that looks after all things to do with migrants and language. The Migrant English and Language Services branch was established in 2021 and is responsible for programs and policy across the spectrum of the migrant language journey. This includes managing English test settings for visa requirements, the delivery and administration of TIS National, the Adult Migrant English Program, the free translating and interpreting services, managing the Commonwealth relationship with NAATI, and leading on multicultural language services policy. It is the first time in many years that these language functions have been brought together in the immigration portfolio, and this has brought with it a renewed focus on reform in this space. Not only am I very passionate about this sector, I can assure you that our branch of over 250 staff is also full of highly committed and passionate people, many of whom have also had first-hand experience in the sector, having previously worked as language teachers or as translators and interpreters, or with linguistic academic experience. People with lived experience, and most importantly, people passionate about supporting new migrants on their settlement journey and ensuring some of our most vulnerable populations can equitably access key services. A key part of the migrant language journey is learning English, and I thought I'd spend a bit of time sharing with you the Adult Migrant English Program, or the AMEP. The AMEP is the longest running and largest government-funded settlement program. Again, reflecting on the contributions that Jill Blewett made to the language services sector, I think also of her peers who were ensuring that programs like the AMEP were safeguarded through the passing of the Immigration Education Act in 1971. Since its establishment in 1948, the program has helped over 2 million migrants and humanitarian entrants settle and participate in the Australian community. In 2021, major legislative reforms were introduced, which increased access to the program and mean that people can now stay in the program for as long as they need to reach a vocational level of English. From the 1st of January 2026, a new business model for the AMEP will be introduced that will provide greater flexibility and enhanced client and teacher supports to further improve English language and settlement outcomes for AMEP clients. The AMEP is much more than an English program. It is often a new migrant's first connection to others outside of their direct family or community group, and plays a crucial role in helping people settle in a new country and take up new opportunities. Rather than try to convey this myself, I thought I would play you this short clip from one of our students, Jenny.
Australia a year ago. I went to work as a nurse here because I was a nurse in Colombia too. So I have been studying English for 6 months here. This program helped me because I was a nurse in Colombia too. So I have been studying English for 6 months here. Writing, reading, listening, speaking. This program helped me how to improve my English skills about writing, reading, listening, speaking, with many things. We use computer, we use a little conversation. The methodology is very, very diverse. My teacher, she gave me a lot a lot of things about not just about English, but also about the basic things in Australia life, such as bushfire, snakes, Medicare system. So I think all these things could be very good environment. They need know this wonderful program because not just is an institution, is something like that, a family. Yes, it's very. You feel very comfortable. They always want to help you improve for any issue you have. If you have problems with Medicare, if you have any problems with personal. Any problems with personal.
Photos from the 1950s showing mums and bubs classes, nurses doing their AMEP class at the hospital, and workers learning on the mining site demonstrate how the AMEP from day one has been delivered in a way to best meet learners' needs. It's one of the core reasons behind the program's success. I thought you might be interested to see footage from a recent project delivered by one of our Victorian providers, Melbourne Polytechnic, in which they provided tuition for deaf and hard of hearing migrants by combining AMEP English tuition with an Auslan teacher. Let's see if I can get the technology. This class was a mix of newly arrived and hard of hearing migrants. And you can see from the footage how engaged they all are and how wonderful the interactions are between the students and the two teachers. I'm pleased to tell you that Melbourne Polytechnic has received several nominations for the Outstanding Settlement Contribution Awards in recognition of this project. Alongside AMEP, TIS National is the other flagship government program that highlights how Australia has long recognised and acted on the need to ensure access, equity and inclusion for new migrants. In 1947, Commonwealth Translating Services began as a result of the post-World War II migration program. As new migrants settled in Australia, the need for language services emerged. In response, the Red Cross and the Australian government began performing translation functions. In 1958, the then Department of Immigration took on multilingual service delivery on behalf of the Australian government. And in 1973, the Australian government established the world's first free emergency telephone interpreting service, with over 11,000 interpreting calls received in the first year to assist new migrants. This was the beginning of the critical nationwide immediate phone interpreting service that TIS National still provides today. TIS National now delivers more than 1 million immediate phone interpreting services each year. In the last financial year, over 30,000 of these calls were responding to 000 emergency numbers, which were answered in 8 seconds on average, critical to saving lives. With access to more than 2,700 interpreters in more than 150 languages, TIS National continues to deliver access and equity to our multicultural community by providing interpreting services that are available 24 hours a day, every day of the year. And I'm excited to tell you that TIS National services are expanding in 2025. We're putting the T back in TIS and re-establishing a translating capability. As part of this work, we've recently revised our agreement with practitioners to include translators, and this agreement has also introduced higher pay rates for certified specialist legal and certified specialist medical interpreting services in recognition of these higher NADI certifications and specialist skills. Please take the time to visit the TIS National booth over the next few days to hear more about these changes. And I'd now like to share with you all a brief interview with Natalia, a Ukrainian interpreter, where she shares her experience of being a TIS National interpreter.
Since the war in Ukraine has started in February 2022, Australia very kindly accepted quite a few refugees from Ukraine. I am helping people to understand each other, the ones who speak Ukrainian and the ones who speak English. For me, it was something that I could do to help my country. In my job, there are quite a lot of memorable moments, but one of the first ones was when I come to the Mother Hospital, where nurses interview refugees about their health. So they say, Natalia, we are so happy that you are today with us. You have such an easy manner with the Ukrainians that it helps us to understand what they are talking about. And the same thing, the same feedback from some Ukrainians saying, we would like you to interpret next time for us. So for me, this is a sign of something that I have done well. And the most important thing is that I feel useful, because I can see immediately impact of my work. So I think that the Australian government is doing a sterling job continuing providing this service. For many migrants, it's a very pleasant and helpful surprise.
Natalia's sentiments of the great satisfaction that translators and interpreters experience in connecting their communities are well known to you all. However, as you are also acutely aware, there are significant challenges facing the sector, making it harder to attract and retain qualified practitioners. At last year's conference, I presented on a practitioner survey the department had undertaken to better understand the experiences of practitioners and gather some evidence around the feedback we were hearing anecdotally. Some of the results were confronting, and I'll recap them briefly here. The department heard from over 2,200 interpreters and translators. As NADI data indicates, the workforce is female dominated, and 2/3 of the responses came from women. The results also align with the NADI data that this is an ageing workforce, with 31% already over the age of 60 and only 23% under the age of 39. Confirming anecdotal evidence, a worrying survey finding was that many interpreters and translators lack formal interpreting qualifications or a NADI certification, with 24% saying they have no formal qualifications and 19% saying they have no NADI credential. More than 2/3 think the casualised nature of the work is impacting turnover, and almost 90% claim that poor remuneration is having an impact on retention in the sector. It is getting harder to retain qualified interpreters and translators due to these issues, and 1/3 of interpreters indicated that they are likely to leave the sector mostly in the next 2 to 5 years. The poor working conditions, combined with the lack of regulations and incentives for interpreters and translators to go through their formal training, has seen many non-credentialed individuals enter the workforce. Almost half of those surveyed know of poor quality interpreting currently occurring in high-risk settings, for example, in law, justice and health settings. So what does poor quality look like? The department received dozens of responses through the survey of harrowing stories about what's happening at the grassroots level. I'll read out 2 of these examples and paraphrase slightly. I came across a woman who was holding a newborn baby and also holding cough syrup at the hospital chemist. The woman was trying to talk to the chemist. I approached and asked her what was wrong. She said she had just 1 bottle of syrup and the interpreter had told her to give the baby the whole bottle, but if she did so, she wouldn't have any left. I was witnessing a legal case and the question was asked, do you declare yourself guilty or not guilty? The interpreter whispered the question to the client. The client whispered back the answer. The interpreter said guilty. The client nudged the interpreter and exclaimed in English, no, not guilty. Issues like this appear to be becoming more regular, increasing the risk of unintended consequences for the client and also the institutions due to potential for negligence. As many of you are aware, last year the department commissioned Deloitte to undertake an economic analysis of the state of the language services sector, with the stark finding that suboptimal service provision is already costing Australian governments and society between approximately $326 million per year at the conservative end and up to as much as $892 million per year. This captures costs across select Australian government case studies and their respective agencies, and public hospitals and health services across Australia. And I should be clear that the study was limited to multicultural interpreting only. It did not consider Auslan or First Nations languages or translating. The costs Deloitte identified were due to factors such as increased length of hospitalisation, administrative burden, adjourned hearings, misinterpreted testimonies, and the failure to provide an interpreter when one was required. All scenarios that I'm sure you're very familiar with. Deloitte estimated that these costs could increase by 18% over the next 10 years as the demand for interpreters grows and as the number of available and credentialed interpreters continues to decline. This information, along with a practitioner survey report, was provided to the Multicultural Framework Review Panel for consideration, with emphasis on the substantial challenges the profession is facing and how vital it is to take action now. The Multicultural Framework Review was the first major examination of the state of Australian multiculturalism in a generation. The independent panel consisted of 3 Australians who have significantly contributed to the fields of multicultural affairs, human rights advocacy, organisational transformation, and community engagement. The Multicultural Framework Review report called attention to how the sustainability and quality of language services is critical to connecting and supporting people with limited English from Australia's diverse communities. The panel heard from community organisations, all tiers of government, and more than 1,000 ordinary Australians. Submissions to the review were accepted in a range of languages by written submission, audio or video message. Language services was the 3rd most prominent theme identified in the 796 public submissions that the panel received. In addition to community groups, government agencies and private organisations, members of the public took the time to write about the importance of language services and how they are fundamental to an inclusive multicultural Australia. I thought I would share a few excerpts from these individual submissions with you. Garish said, access to language services is crucial for effective communication, especially in areas like healthcare, legal matters and education. Enhancing language support can prevent misunderstandings and ensure that everyone has equal access to essential services. Marianne Geller said, I have been a point of reference for new to Australia migrants from Italy for close to 20 years. I believe that it is difficult for those who want to migrate to Australia to find the information they need quickly, easy, and in everyday language. I'm first generation Italian, and I know how difficult it was for my parents 64 years ago to migrate here. In 2023, it should not be that difficult. Amal said, I call on the government to consider the dangers of low-cost service, especially in this particular field where poor translation and/or interpreting can be detrimental to people's lives, for example, in health and law. No self-respecting professional would accept such treatment, and consequently, only low-quality performers will be used for low-quality outcomes. Is that what we want in our country? And finally, Soraya said, in my observation, members of multicultural communities, particularly those with intersectional vulnerabilities, underutilise services which are supposed to be available to all Australians. For example, translated materials are generally an afterthought and often only available in summarised form. There is a lack of culturally and linguistically competent services where they are needed. For example, for new refugees from smaller communities, there is usually a shortage of professional interpreters or professionals adequately trained in trauma-informed care. Aged services cannot adequately cater for older migrants reverting to language of origin who require care by speakers of these languages. And that's just a couple of examples from the hundreds of individual submissions that were received. The report, Towards Fairness, A Multicultural Australia for All, was released in July 2024. The report contained 29 recommendations and covers themes of identity, belonging, representation, connection, inclusion, research, evaluation and reporting, leadership and accountability. 4 of these recommendations relate directly to language and language services. Recommendation 12 is to leverage Australia's diversity of languages to support our economic prosperity through a revitalised language policy led by the Australian Government. Recommendation 13 is to ensure the sustainability and quality of language services. Recommendation 14 is to establish a fully funded TIS national capacity within the existing business unit. And recommendation 15 is to boost NAATI funding. The recommendations emerge from 3 core principles of the review. Connection, setting the foundations of a multicultural Australia through leadership, planning and accountability between 3 tiers of government and communities. Identity and belonging, creating a welcoming Australia through English language programs, citizenship policy and participation in arts, culture, sports and media. And inclusion, building cultural capability into public services, modernising grant programs, ensuring digital inclusion, ensuring a sustainable language services sector, and meeting the unique needs of young people and regional areas. The government has committed to the framework's principles and will be guided by them to ensure Australia's multicultural settings are fit for purpose. To work collaboratively on tackling the critical issues facing the language services sector, the department has continued extensive engagement across Commonwealth, state and territory agencies and sector stakeholders across multicultural Auslan and First Nations language groups through two key forums. The first, the Intergovernmental Officials Group on Language Services, brings together Australian, state and territory government officials to collaborate on policy matters relating to the conditions of the translating and interpreting profession nationwide. This has resulted in the development of a targeted working group to consider data collection and scholarships. In terms of data, the group is considering current data collection mechanisms, data standards and opportunities to improve data consistency across jurisdictions to better understand service access and quality gaps reported by multicultural populations. The group is also reviewing jurisdictional scholarship programs for training and development, including levels of funding, targeted language groups and the effectiveness of different interpreter scholarship programs, with the long-term view of seeing how we can have a more collaborative and targeted approach across jurisdictions. The second forum the department has been convening this year is the National Language Services Forum, which brings together over 120 sector representatives, including government department representatives, industry bodies, academic institutions, and language service providers to discuss challenges and opportunities relating to language sector sustainability in Australia. This forum serves as a consultation mechanism to exchange information, to share ideas and experiences, and to connect with one of the other. Many of the participants of these forums are here today, and I want to say a huge thank you for your engagement throughout the year. We found it invaluable. Over the year, the forum has heard from a diverse range of presenters about initiatives and research across the sector, including from SBS Australia, the New South Wales Police Force, the Victorian Refugee Health Network, the Queensland Women's Health in the South East, the New South Wales Department of Customer Service and the University of Technology in Sydney. The forum will be continuing in 2025, so please reach out to us if you'd like to be involved or if you have any ideas for future presentations. The sustainability of the language services sector is also a recurring agenda item at the Ministerial Forum on Multicultural Affairs. Ministers have previously agreed to collaborate to better address challenges undermining the sector and secure equitable access for people with low English proficiency. The department is working through our various stakeholder forums on initiatives to put to the forum for endorsement and collaborative action. As we know through the work undertaken last year, governments are the largest purchasers of language services in Australia, and government procurement practices have been identified as an underlying reason for some of the issues facing the sector. While value for money is the primary consideration, and this involves more than just cost, we recognise that often contracts are awarded to the lowest price provider and there is limited regulation of standards, which in turn leads to poorer paying conditions for practitioners and an increased use of unqualified practitioners. Following the work we did with Deloitte last year on the economic analysis of the current state of the sector, we have engaged them again to scope potential improvements to Commonwealth procurement and contract management arrangement of language services. This involves in-depth engagement with other large buying Commonwealth agencies to understand their current processes and pain points. As part of this work, Deloitte has also surveyed some language services providers about their experience with providing language services to the Australian government. And I thank those of you who are here today who have been involved in responding to those surveys. We also had the opportunity this morning to co-host a workshop with AUSIT and NAATI with a range of language services providers from across Australia. It was a frank discussion about the challenges the sector is facing and the opportunities to enhance quality and consistency. And again, thank you to all of you here today who were involved in that meeting this morning. We all agree that it will take a concerted effort from all stakeholders to address the challenges impacting the sector and ensure that Australia continues to be a world leader in this space. In July this year, the department engaged the NAUS group to undertake an evaluation of the free interpreting service and free translating service. These are both long-standing programs that haven't been independently evaluated for a long time. The The free interpreting service allows free access to TIS National for eligible groups to communicate with clients who have little or no English proficiency. And you can see from the slide the groups that are currently eligible to access the free interpreting service. The free translating service assists people settling in Australia to have eligible documents translated into English within 2 years of their visa grant to support their participation in education, employment and society. The evaluation is considering the extent to which the programs are meeting the needs of their clients, the target clients, achieving their intended outcomes, being used by eligible groups, and identifying opportunities for improvement. The free interpreting service evaluation included broad consultation with community members and stakeholders from across government, peak bodies, multicultural organisations and client sectors, including a survey of people with limited English proficiency, to which we received 750 responses, a survey of registered free interpreting service agency clients, to which we received 1,059 responses, and 5 focus groups with people with limited English proficiency, 2 agency client focus groups, and 22 stakeholder interviews. The evaluations are nearing completion, and we've already heard significant feedback through the consultations. I thought I'd share a few key insights with you from the free interpreting service evaluation. As I talk through the key findings that we've taken from these consultations, I invite you to read some of the quotes we received from participants, which really highlight how this is impacting people and organisations on the ground. The free interpreting service matters. Survey respondents said language barriers have a significant impact on their lives, especially their ability to access services and integrate into Australian society. 84% report facing issues when accessing services, and more than 90% say the free interpreting service helped them understand information and participate in Australian society. Risks of using children or family members as interpreters. Professional interpreting services have distinct advantages, as you all know. Stakeholders called out the emotional burden placed on children when required to interpret sensitive information, such as health or financial issues, for their parents, not to mention the risks around that. Apps and technology are handy but have limitations. While eligible agency clients prefer the free interpreting service over any other interpreting method, more than 75% of the people with low English proficiency who were surveyed said they prefer to use family members or apps to communicate. Confidentiality is the biggest pain point. 29% of the limited English speakers surveyed raised confidentiality or privacy concerns as reasons not to use the free interpreting service. Other service pay points may discourage future use. Stakeholders reported a number of service delivery issues as reasons not to use the free interpreting service, including inconsistent interpreter quality and reliability, interpreters engaging in other activities while interpreting, limited interpreter supply for some languages, and the time required to connect with an interpreter. The free interpreting service is not just for new arrivals. Limited English speakers say they intend to keep using the service into the future, even when their English proficiency improves, especially in settings that involve specific terminology. The free interpreting service also has ongoing relevance for ageing Australians where English isn't their first language. We also learnt that not enough of the people who could be accessing the free interpreting service know about it. Having done some targeted promotions in previous years with varying impacts, this is something we're definitely keen to improve. As a start, at the TIS National booth, we've got some free interpreting service flyers, so please take some and share them. This is a government service that more people should be making use of. The department will be using the evaluation findings to feed into future decisions around the design, intent and reach of both the free translating and the free interpreting services. Finally, I would like to touch on work being done by the department to increase accessibility of our website. The need for clearer, more accurate and timely messaging in languages other than English has always been a major capability gap for government agencies. This became more apparent during the COVID-19 pandemic and various humanitarian crises. During these events, it was not possible to keep pace with the rapid flow of information to provide accurate and timely translated content to vulnerable communities. The department's external-facing web content is predominantly in English, and previously only 2% of the content was translated. As our website is constantly being refined and updated, undertaking manual translations was costly and inefficient, as the translations were only ever valid for a specific point of time, particularly in times of crisis when information is changing rapidly. To address this, earlier this year, the department rolled out an on-demand web translation function. As there wasn't any commercial or off-the-shelf product that was able to deliver on the department's requirements, the team developed a technical and business solution that takes into account different translation paths that cater for sensitivity, complexity of the English content, and immediacy of need. As you all know, multiple factors affect the quality of translation output, including readability and complexity of the source English text, proficiency of the translator, consistency between different translators, and maturity of translation engines. From a business process perspective, the team established a framework through analysis of language data and statistics to inform the language priority and content selection. This is then balanced with the complexity of English content, with the outcome being delivering selected languages accurately using a machine translation-enabled service coupled with NAATI credentialed translators. The translation management system is an in-house workflow integrated with existing web publishing processes. NAATI credentialed translators log into the translation management system to do translations and quality assurance. The system is consistent with the Australian Government Language Services Guidelines and other various standards, such as the ISO standard developed for post-editing of machine translation output and the TALS Dynamic Quality Framework for error reporting. This slide, I'm just waiting to see if it's going to move by itself or if I have to... no, it's moving by itself. So this slide shows the translator's view of the translation management system. Translators see a side-by-side view of the content in English and in language. The top view shows how the content is displayed on the website. The bottom view shows the content broken into sections for ease of editing. Glossary and terms that should not be translated are highlighted on the English side. Where edits are required, translators click on the section to be changed and then edit the translation. Translators must specify why the section requires edits using the post-review questions known as error codes. This data is used to improve translation quality and is related to both accuracy, which helps assess the quality and maturity of the machine content, and fluency, which helps assess the quality of the content. Each phase of the project was tested and evaluated to assess outcomes relating to readability, machine translation quality, the maturity of languages, glossary application, and capability performance. A private community engagement exercise was conducted in October last year and engaged with over 150 people from the community who reviewed the translation of 96 web pages. The community engagement validated a high demand from the multilingual community for Home Affairs website content to be available in language and that the quality of the translations was satisfactory. The on-demand web translation was publicly rolled out in July this year. The department has launched with 16 languages across 98 pages of Home Affairs web content, being a mixture of machine translation and post-editing. The selected total languages for on-demand web translation cover 92% of clients who currently use a translation mechanism on the department's website. 7 languages have been assessed as suitable for machine translation only, and these are Chinese simplified, French, German, Italian, Portuguese, Spanish, and Thai. 9 languages continue to involve manual translations. These are Arabic, Chinese, traditional, Farsi, Hindi, Japanese, Korean, Russian, Turkish, and Vietnamese. Clients visiting the department's website are able to select their language from a drop-down, which will update the English content within the page to the chosen language. The whole page is translated, including the menu. Users can navigate to other pages in language. The translation will automatically display in the language previously selected. Since launch, the department has had more than 14,000 people using the feature, with the top translated languages being Arabic, both simplified and traditional, Chinese, Spanish, and French. As part of further expansion, the department is evaluating additional machine translation engines and language performance, with the view of expanding to additional translation engines that best pair with specific languages. The on-demand web translation, like the other integral programs and initiatives I've talked about today, is the culmination of a collective effort to address the challenges we face in a rapidly evolving world and to meet the access and equity needs of our diverse communities. No single person or organisation can achieve this alone. My sincere thanks again to Erica and the National AUSIT Council for the opportunity to deliver this year's Jill Blewett Memorial Lecture. It's been a true honour. I would like to leave you with a final reflection on Jill Blewett's legacy, and I cannot summarise it better than Adolfo Gentil, another powerhouse in the sector, who in his 2008 lecture said, "The most effective way of commemorating her work is to carry it on, to pursue with the same determination and clarity of purpose the goals which will enhance our profession, not for the profession itself, but for the objectives and the clients which it serves." As you reflect on that and look around at your colleagues, I hope you feel incredibly proud of the contributions you are making to connect our communities and ensure access and equity for some of our most vulnerable populations. There's an absolutely fabulous lineup of presentations and workshops over the next few days. Take the opportunity to attend as many as you can, but also take the opportunity to connect to each other in the breaks. This is a really fantastic opportunity for us to all share ideas and experiences and challenges, but also, as Erica said, celebrate this wonderful industry as well. I'm really looking forward to meeting with many of you and hearing your perspectives over the next couple of days. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was a brilliant. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Yes. Thank you so much, Ali, and the gifts from translation. So they are actually designed by local Aboriginal artists. So you'll have some nice things to take home from NARM. So thank you.
Thank you so much.